Okay, tonight, continuing our weekly COVID-19 kata seminar series. Tonight's kata is Kanku Sho. So this is the first of one of our so-called advanced kata. At least that's what Sensei Nakayama labeled them. The advanced kata are, they're a little more advanced from the point of view of they have more specialized moves than the katas we've done to date. And some of the movements are kind of athletic in some of these kata. So it takes an advanced person to do them justice. But in my mind, if an advanced person does a basic kata, it becomes an advanced kata. Because it's really the person that's advanced, not the kata. But functionally, for us, these advanced kata are the ones that I don't have any kind of recent text to confer with because Japan has not translated the books for these kata into English yet. So I'll be using Best Karate and Karate Do Kyohan and seminars and what have you, recent teachings to put together my analysis, my points. Kanku Sho, Kanku means viewing the sky, Sho means lesser or small. Most people credit its invention to Sensei Itosu, who was Sensei Funakoshi's, one of his main instructors, but if he didn't invent it, either his instructor did or his instructor, so he certainly learned it from them. So it was disseminated through him anyway. Kanku Sho is characterized by its very dynamic kata. It's got a lot of flurries of very fast motions separated by very dramatic slow movements. And it is an interesting blend of kind of fancy techniques, specialized techniques, and then going back to very basic techniques in places. The Dai versus Sho, we have three kata that have a Dai and Sho versions, Basai, Goju-Sho, and Kanku. So the Dai is the kata that came first, and the Sho katas are derived from them or inspired by them. So the Dai, the big, versus the Sho, small, has to do with one, the Dai kata tend to have more movements, higher movement count. The Dai kata tend to have more big, basic movements. But mostly, I think the Sho versus Dai has to do with the inventor of the Sho katas called them lesser in deference to the original kata, to show that they were their derived kata. Okay, so to start off, we have our guest demonstrator, Mike Jacobs. He'll do the kata to count. Kanku Sho! Yoi. 1、2、3、4、5、6、はい、4、8、9、1、2、3、4、5、6、7、8、9、1、2、3、4、5、6、7、8、9、1、2、3、4、5、6、7、8、9、1、2、3、4、5、6、7、8、9、10、はい The first three movements of the kata, Morote uke, augmented block, augmented uchi uke block. The first move does not shift. Okay, the second two include yoriashi shifting. So the first one do not shift. Starting from the upper top down, in the old days, the old videos and even best karate, they did these blocks from the shoulder area, but now they're done from down low. Okay. Now this has been described how to do to me by one of the Japanese instructors, I don't remember which, to come to here first and then make a uchi uke, a morote uke. Okay. But in actuality, these movements are done so quickly that you really can't, nobody gets back to this position, all the way to this position, because this movement has to be done so quickly. So mostly these three movements in the arm movements, the first one kind of whips like this, and the second one kind of goes from that position, and the third kind of goes from that position. And there's very little time to come back. If you have time, fine, but if that's slowing you down in the movement, then that's not correct. Because your arms have to whip in order to catch up with your legs, which we'll talk about next. People have trouble, even advanced people have trouble with these moves because the first move, for example, I mentioned you got to twist the hip at the end of a movement, okay? But if we were stepping back, so the end of the movement, we'll call it the last quarter of the movement if we're stepping. So if I was going from back stance, from here, back to here, okay? And the first quarter of the movement would be here, the middle of the movement would be here, the third quarter of the movement would be here, and that is when the hip snaps open, okay? The third quarter of the movement would be here. 1, 2, 3, third quarter. But if we're coming from Hachiji Dachi, our feet are in a position where we're already almost to the end of the movement. So if you step back and then make the hip move, you're dogging the movement. Okay, so you have to, from standing, your hip has to snap to this position and then go into stance. Your hip snaps right away. And the people who don't quite have that are stepping and then moving the hip, and they're not quite getting it around. So you really have to emphasize from here, and that's why the arms have to move fast, is snap the hip. Then from here, emphasis is again, snap the hip, then again, snap the hip. So right away the hip has to snap, and that's why the arms have to move so quickly to here, or else you're going too slowly. So those are the key points of those movements. Obviously, morote uke, bunkai is blocking various punching techniques. And timing. So Mike will show us the timing of these two movements is 1, 2, 3. Okay? So the faster you can do the second two correctly, the better. So the next, 3 lunge punches. Again, the timing is 1, 2, 3, so I keep Mike there to show you the timing. Okay, first, now, again, like I said, we did some fancy shifting, hip snapping. Now all of a sudden we're doing 3 lunge punches as if we're back to hand shoda. The only difference is that we are going to do this action after each one. So, important thing if you're doing lunge punch anytime, but especially if you want your kata to be scored high, you make sure that your hip is snapping shut. Lunge punch, your hip must snap shut. So some people are just punching, and the hip is not doing anything. You're just stepping forward, but the hip should snap to the closed position to lock in the lunge punch. This action of pulling your arm back, some people think this is inside block or something, but I can find no indication in any of the old videos. And I watched, the oldest one I could find was Sensei, I think Mikami it was, doing it in the 50s. I found no indication that anybody ever thought this was some kind of inside block. So instead, the bunkai, possible bunkai, is that somebody's grabbing the wrist from underneath. If somebody grabs the wrist from the top, you'd pull down to escape, but if they grab from underneath, you would pull up to here. So bunkai can mean releasing the grip. Somebody's grip. But other than that, when you're doing the kata, all you have to think about is the same as if you punch and you're coming to here, but you have to make sure that you deliver the power. Deliver the power, then snap to this position. Okay, don't leave the lunge punch out. That's the most important thing. Then snap to here. So this is a crisp motion. It's not relaxed, it's crisp. And it should be done in one breath. You're still breathing out. Okay. Next series. Two sets. Tsukami okay. Hurricane. Double punch. And one more, exactly the same. Okay. So Tsukami Uke means grabbing block. Important thing here, first important thing is make sure your elbow goes along your body. As you turn from this position, your elbow has to go along the body and straight out in front. Okay? Your hand is open to the front in a koko, the tiger mouth position, exactly the position that you would grab somebody's wrist. The left hand is supporting the right wrist with the elbow slightly away from the ribs. Slightly away from the ribs. Okay, not quite a right angle, a little bit inside. I don't know if I can get this so you can see it. Okay. And the stance is gyaku hamni. Whenever we say gyaku hamni, it means your shoulders and hip turn past center. You can't make a long front stance. You have to make slightly shorter one, or your hip won't get all the way around. So people that think stances always have to be long are not going to be able to do advanced kata, because advanced kata are adapting the length and width of the stances to the situation, to the bunkai. So if you're going to do gyaku hamni, your stance is not going to be like this. It's going to be a little shorter. So advanced kata, make sure that you do that. Second, now next, you're kicking it at the same time that your foot would hit the opponent, you pull him down to your body. So you're kicking and pulling his wrist into you. This should hint to you, it's important because we're kicking and then we're moving forward into this next technique. It's important to know that this is a very short kick. And in being short, shutdown kick, your upper body can't move. Like hip way forward. Your upper body shouldn't lean back. And neither did your hip go very far past center, or else your kick would be too long. So a lot of the kicks in Shotokan kata are not offensive kicks. front kicks. They're defensive kicks. A lot of them are like this, that you're holding on to somebody, and in Okinawa, self-defense style, usually you kick low, front kick. So that's the spirit. Now the kicks that might have been gate on before are usually chewed on, but they probably were originally gate on. So short kicks so you don't disrupt your forward movement for tate, uraken, uchi. This one comes like this. Some people come a little bit around, and some people come here, but either one's fine. I said this before, as long as you get your elbow on the center line so that you can make a vertical strike. You cannot do this properly if you come off your right shoulder like this. So your elbow has to come to here. So your forearm has to come to the center of your head at some point. And I said before also, tate uraken, make sure that your contact hits something. The contact is forward, not down. You're hitting to jinshu forward. Okay, so it goes this way. If people change the angle of the elbow from the body or unbend the elbow too much, this strike will go in the wrong direction. Then uchi-uke, basic. Double punch, basic. And geiran-uke and uchi-uke. These techniques are done, timing is stop, go, pam pam, go. Okay, so those are done in pretty quick. You stop at the kosadachi, back fist strike. Then the others, the timing is 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so the double punches are a little bit quicker, but otherwise the whole thing's done in pretty quick succession. So people have trouble, especially trouble with this one. Probably because I'm doing weird things with my arms, so probably because they're thinking about their arms too much. So this is very similar to this movement in Hangetsu. Okay, but it's actually not quite as hard because you're not turning all the way around, but you're just pivoting on an axis. And that's the key. From here, your weight distribution is exactly where it should be for the next move. So your weight distribution doesn't change. So what you have to think about is breathing in, crossing the arms against the body, just like hand sandan, and making sure that you pivot on this axis, and don't think about your block at all. Keep your elbows very close to your side. Pivot on the axis, and think about like there's a pole, like running through your head, through your hip down to the floor, like a spear. And as you turn, bam, think of the spear like going downward. And that's all you think about is turn and chunk that spear into the ground. And then you'll do okay. But if you think, if people are doing like too big an arm motion or something, when the hip twist is just bang, very fast. So the arms have to move very fast also. The angle of this movement is very similar to hand sandan, it's just off this side. This one is front, this one is to the right. 90-degree angle. Elbows down, one fist away from your body. Okay, standard. The bunkai is pretty simple. Down block or inside block to you could be blocking a stomach punch from the front, but more likely somebody's coming from the side simultaneously. That's why this hand is here. Next movement. From here, the meaning is somebody grabs your wrist, you break the grab, very similar to hand shodan. You break the grab and you bring this part of your knuckles down on the top of their hand. This is done very slowly. So from here, slow, and keep decelerate. Do a quick decelerate, decelerate. And you should move your foot in as you're moving your hand down. So don't move your foot in and continue making the block. Try to do it all in one motion. Your feet, your legs, and the strike at the same time. Now in the oldest video that I saw, they did this as a down block. So somewhere somebody changed it, and I think it's a change for the better, because meaning somebody grabbed my hand and I hit him, but otherwise I'm making 2 down blocks in a row, and that's a little bit harder to explain. What's a bunkai to that? I don't know. But I like to differentiate this one from Kanku Dai. In this one, the person's grabbing my front hand, so I break that grip and hit him. In Kanku Dai, I have the other hand out. He's grabbing my right hand, maybe. Now, down block would release that grip. And I end in the same position in the 2 katas. But the bunkais are very different, so it's good to differentiate. Okay. All right, so we had two of the same set there. Oh, last point. Do one again. It's very important when you do these movements, same as hand 4, that when you kick and make kosadachi, that you're making almost a stance and a half advance. You have to go far. Okay, so make sure that that's a long movement, that move into kosadachi. Okay, next movement. Next move. Okay. Now we have just like Jion or something, Geiran Uke and Joran Uchiuke. We open the hands before we start the motion, as they've changed all the kata that have this kind of motion in the old days, and Mori Sensei included. They did these with the hand closed. So, interestingly, I think I remember this, the oldest, I believe in best karate, they had their hands closed, but in the old video at Mikami Sensei, he opened his hands. So, I think this is an indication that until they standardized the kata, people were doing these kind of movements differently. So they had to settle on one way. So from here, next movement starts from Churan level to Morotesuki, double punch. Okay, couple of working from the top down. Interesting. These beginning of the kata, they used to start from shoulder level with the fist, but this one and they went down to the hip. This one, they're not coming down to the hip. They're coming up from the shoulder level. Okay? I said before that I've said many times that any arm technique, the course of the elbow must be consistent with the course of the technique, because whatever way the elbow is going, that's where the force is going. So in this case, this is consistent with that. The elbows are moving to the side. Yet, in Teki Shodan, we have a very similar technique, and we start from the hip. Okay, but they want this from more high armpit. Okay, the only reason I can think of why, because obviously you can do this technique from the hip, is that this upper hand is in such a high elevated position that it takes longer to bring it to the hip than it does to bring it to here. Okay, and that's my idea. Otherwise, I have not heard any instructor say why here, not here. But so they want to hear from the shoulders. These two techniques. Morote Tsuki can mean that you just blocked the opponent's incoming punch, and then you punched him with two fists into the ribs, either side of the breastbone. It's similar to Hangetsu, 10 inches apart. Hit here, you can do it with closed fists too. Okay? Or, from here, you're blocking a punch with the one hand, and the other hand is simultaneously striking the opponent. So it can be either one of those bunkai feelings. This Morote Tsuki, obviously if your idea is you're punching the opponent at the same time, your fists have to be pretty close. But they can be a little bit off. That's okay. That's consistent with my second bunkai. Okay? That if one's a block and one's a punch, that's consistent with that. So, like other movements in katas from kibarachi stance, I said it's really important you get your shoulders all the way around to make these kinds of movements, whether it's punching, Heian 5, or Teki Shodan. You got to get your shoulders all the way around. If you're back here somewhere, it's not going to work. You got to move your shoulders all the way around. And to help you do that, as I said, for Empi, your hip can move a little bit in kibarachi. About maybe 1 or 2 inches. This hip bone can rotate forward, rotating, so that you get a little bit more around. Okay, this is an advanced technique. You have to be very familiar with kibarachi stance to know whether by moving the hip slightly, you're losing integrity or not in the back leg. Because that's what's going to happen if you go too far. This leg starts to come in. And the other way you're going to know that is to have somebody step on it. Okay? If you can't equally support their weight in these two positions, then you don't understand the stance. So it's difficult for beginners to do this hip rotation in kibarachi stance. It's an advanced technique. Okay, next series from Morote Tsuki. Okay. All right, from Morote Tsuki, the next technique is called Ryobo Uke. It just means two-handed stick block. Okay, and it's very important. Well, first, there's an adjustment step, and from the beginning of time, nobody's done this differently. Kibarachi stance is when you do an adjustment step. I've said before, your leg comes to your center of gravity, so that you're moving straight down the line of the attack. Kibarachi is the only stance where it's actually a half step. For your leg to come to the center of gravity is a half step. Other stances, back stance, front stance, depends. Where is your center of gravity already? So when people say half step, do the move, they're not quite, it's not quite descriptive enough. So the important thing is as you do the movement, that you don't go off that line when you make the half step, that your body stays right on that line. Second, so you're catching the bow, and the opponent's coming, hitting. So it's very important for you, the practitioner, to realize if you go when the bow is here, you cannot catch it. Oh yeah, you can catch it, but your hands are going to break because it's got a lot of speed and momentum there. The place you catch it is here. Before as the swing starts, but before it gathers any momentum. Okay, and that's why the proper position for this block is about here. Your right hand, in my case, is parallel to your elbows in, one fist away from the hip. Your left hand down the center line of your forehead, but the right hand is about parallel to the floor. So you're catching the stick. Well, it's still got kind of an angle to you. You're also moving into the opponent, which allows you to catch it before it commits. You're moving into the opponent. And this movement is done very slowly. Okay. Next, you push down and you go into Fudo Dachi. Okay? Because you were in back stance, Fudo Dachi here is very narrow, because you don't want to step. If you're trying to go down this line from back stance, you don't want to step into a wide stance and go off to the side. You want to go straight in. The application here is you caught him with the stick before he's got any momentum, and then you push, okay, the stick either into his groin or between his legs, which will set him off balance. Just push him down on the stick. Okay, so once the stick's pushed down, now you picture you've got opponents on both sides, both of them have a bow. You push this bow away from this opponent, the other one is swinging his bow at your back leg, so you have to jump up, and then you block one of the opponent's attacking as you come down. So that jump, you have to go really high, same as MP, jump high. Then, from here, once you land to here, we are in our classic, many of the kata have the same motion, kiage, back fist strike, elbow strike, no adjustment step, kiage, back fist strike, elbow strike. Reiterating some of the things I said about this movement before, do not, well first, the bunkai, they always describe in the text that you're hitting somebody in the temple and in the side at the same time. But nobody ever demonstrates that kind of bunkai because that means the opponent's so close to you, it's really hard to get a kick in. Usually you're blocking a face punch with the back of your hand kicking either to the ribs or the armpit with the kick, then grabbing the opponent by the sleeve or the gi and elbowing to ribs. But when you do these movements, don't think about making a great, high, nice kick. Think about setting yourself up for a powerful elbow strike. So that means completely up to your flexibility. You must be completely straight when you make this kick. Because if you lean back, your body has to kind of like a spring, kind kind of loll its way back to vertical again to get to the elbow strike. But the elbow strike's got to come very quickly. So you have to set up for the elbow strike. Make a smaller kick. I'm not so flexible, I'll kick low. If you're flexible, cool. Just check a mirror, don't lean. Stay straight. So it doesn't take a long time to hit the elbow strike. And again, for elbow strike, so many black belts don't know how to do this. My MP or Washi MP, whatever you want to call it, because they're bringing the elbow up away from the body. And as soon as you do that, your strike becomes disconnected from your torso, your hip. It's the hip turning that makes this technique powerful. So elbow strike comes from here. It starts like a low punch, then you turn. It starts like a low punch, then you turn. If you practice this low strike, this elbow brushing aside, and only after the elbow clears your hip do you turn over, and you practice that, you're going to feel weak if you've been doing it the other way. Why? Because you've been using your shoulder for power, and now you can't use your shoulder for power because it's hardly doing anything. Now you have to use your hip. But if you use your hip, learn how to use your hip in the elbow strike, you will soon discover how much stronger the strike is than the way you were doing it before. So, you just believe me. Next. Okay, so now we start by repeating Tsukami-uke, grabbing block, front kick, same as before, pull back, tate, uraken, this one is a little bit of a pause, then quick, boom, 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 those are done quickly. Next, the application is that the opponent is punching and you're blocking with the back of the hand, haishu-uke, okay? And then you're either grabbing the opponent's wrist and making Mikazuki Gari, crescent kick to the ribs, or the opponent punches again and you're blocking the punch with the crescent kick. So. And you're ducking down because there's somebody in front of him swinging a stick at his head. So, again, so the important element here for doing this jump right is that your arm doesn't come up too high because you want to stay low. So this jump is not up. You're trying to stay under everybody on this jump. So you're trying to spin on your axis best you can, but stay low to the ground. Because as you make this next kick, somebody's swinging a stick at your head. So try to stay down. Notice that he lands approximately one stance back from where he was previously. And this is true of the other jump. Can you go back to that one? From here, also, his front foot now is where his back foot was before. Okay. My only last thing to say about this one is this is a backhand block. In the oldest videos, they do it completely as a backhand block. Then they started to do it from palm down and then turn the wrist over. Okay. A lot of the competitors now do this almost like kakeuke. They turn over at the end. Okay, next move. So this move is done in place, and this stance should be very low compared to a regular back stance. And notice that because it's a geidan uke, shuto geidan uke, that the right hand is pointed slightly downward, as it would be anytime we do geidan shuto uke. Then stepping forward, regular shuto uke. Now maybe you want to face a different way. Ending the kata. Okay, now we're ending the kata with the movements that usually end up making the person's score go down. Why? Because they were just doing all this jumping around and doing all these fancy shiftings and stuff. They're out of breath, and the last 4 movements of the kata are just like hand shoudan, except that we're doing inside block instead of down block, which means the person doing it is exhausted, and now you have to show us, you showed us your high jumps and stuff, but now you got to show us your basics. So I'll talk just a little bit again, going back to the Heian Shodan kata. I said in Heian Shodan that these movements, these turns, are really hard to do fast, smooth, and retain your balance. And we introduce them in the first kata we teach, even if you're doing taikyoku, the first kata that we teach beginners, we give them this super hard turn. So I guess if you're going to learn something hard, best time to do is start now, because it's going to take you 25 years to get it right if it doesn't take longer. So, what I talked about before, especially with these turning into blocks, is that the mistake that people make is they start to turn too early. So they're actually, sometimes they move their hands first, but they shouldn't. The hands start to move as you start the motion, but the hip has to turn at the last moment. So the thing that you have to think about is getting that foot to there very quickly. If you turn and then make the movement, you're actually making 2 movements. So the people that kind of turn throughout the movement end up closing their hip a lot of times at the end of this, but it should stay open. So now we're talking about the hip. The leg has to shoot to position as fast as possible. The arms have to keep up. The hip snaps at the very end of the movement. So the leg shoots out. The hip is still here. When the leg touches down, then the hip fires at the last second, or just as the leg touches down. It ends in an open position so that when you get to here, if you're closing, you've got rotational movement going into settling into your stance, and you're going to lose your balance. Instead, if it goes open, creates a forward feeling dynamic, and it's not so easy to lose your balance. Yet your hip is closing toward the direction of the opponent, because it's here. As this leg shoots back, at the last moment it goes here. So it turns 90 degrees into an open position. So everybody practice both this trying to get your leg around as fast as you can. Get the leg to shoot to position, and get your arms and hip to catch up. Don't turn and block. It's all happening at the same time, but the leg is the one that has to move. And then, of course, hand shodan. If you're going to make lunge punch, you have to have no funny motion in the. Your supporting leg has to be firm. You can't move your foot out first, stepping forward, nor can you move, adjust, like if you're coming here, you can't lift the heel before you turn, things like that. Otherwise it'll just slow you right down. Kanku show's a tough one. That's why I have Mike here to demonstrate, instead of me trying to jump around. You have to be young and spry to do it well. That concludes our Kanku show seminar. And we'll be back next week with another kata. I do not know which one yet, but I will let you know.